I work at Starbucks. I've worked there for a very long time. I'm a shift supervisor, and this means I get to touch a lot of money. I work every weekday morning, and the highlight of my morning is putting together the daily deposit and going to the bank, because then I get about 45 minutes before my lunch where I don't need to stand in my store. On Monday morning, I was counting the deposit and entering it into the system when I came across something unusual. First, let me explain this to you. My store balances the registers to $200. Every time a barista is finished with their till, a supervisor counts it and inserts everything over $200 into a numbered plastic drop bag, which is recorded into a log and dropped into the safe. The closing supervisor didn't enter a barista's cash register into our cash management log. That was boring. I'm sorry. My job is boring. So what happened? My computer program tells me that I should have 6 drop bags in front of me, but there are only 5. The logbook only has 5. $300 has evaporated. Tuesday wasn't any better. Following the mass panic between me, my boss, and the shift team, everybody was on high alert. 6 years of doing the exact same thing every morning, and I have never seen a loss like this. You can imagine my dismay then when the exact same thing happened during the Tuesday deposit. Another missing drop bag, this time recorded in the logbook, but nobody working the previous night actually remembered putting it in the safe. Days pass. The next Tuesday, my coworker Leanne is on her period. I'm telling you this because she kept her pads in a giant wallet and took the wallet out of her locker upstairs and left it on the back desk while she rushed to the washroom. Also on the desk was our store's laptop and Leanne's phone. Our milk order arrived in the midst of a rush, and Leanne wandered into the back store to go look at her phone. But her phone wasn't there, nor her wallet. She searched for it everywhere but couldn't find it. Our coworker Alicia began to help her search, reassuring her that it was probably just a dumb prank by the guys working. I'll tell you now that I wasn't here for this part because it was so busy, and I also wasn't the supervisor on duty. While all this happened, I was making frappuccinos. Leanne told Delphine, the supervisor, that her phone and wallet were missing from the back desk. Delphine went to have a look. We were 2 people on the floor with a crapload of customers. Delphine noticed the laptop was missing and the back desk was in a total state of disarray. Leanne said it was like that before she started looking for a phone. Leanne used Alicia's phone for Find My iPhone. The phone was still in the building. Leanne, Alicia, and Delphine came out and quietly told us they think somebody jacked their stuff from the back room, but because the door is literally on the floor, how could anybody have come in without being seen? I'll tell you, through the garbage room. In the back room, there is a door that leads to the service hallway connecting my store to the other stores. At the end of the hall is a garbage room, and we leave the garbage door open because it smells terrible. So Delphine, Alicia, and Leanne went into the hall to see that our back door was not locked. They also saw that the stairway down to the basement was unlocked. Alicia opened the door and saw that the lights in the basement were on. They heard a noise, footsteps. Leanne trotted down the steps, and at the bottom she saw a man. The man had her giant blue Kate Spade wallet sticking out of his back pocket. Her phone was probably there too. The store laptop was on the floor. Leanne said she began to panic and asked him not to move and who he was. He said to her, the girl in the green apron, I work at Starbucks. Okay, sir, same. He started walking towards her. She told him not to move and started to cry. He pushed her, and apparently quite hard, and zoomed up the stairs straight past Delph and Alicia into the garbage room. Leanne ran very quickly behind him and grabbed his shirt, managed to get both her phone and wallet when they fell out of his pants. Unsurprisingly, the man got away. For somebody to know this building this well was pretty unusual. Our own manager didn't even know we had a basement. It's going to be a few weeks before we find out what the cameras recorded on the days the money went missing, and when this dude poked through our back store, but we all agree that his familiarity with the service hall and garbage room and basement setup was suspicious. When I try and put the pieces together, considering everything from employee theft to accidentally throwing the money in the garbage, the idea that an intruder waited for an opportunity and took it makes the most sense. We're lucky nobody was really hurt, but afraid the man might come back. For now, all we can do is make sure our back door is always firmly locked and that our phones are safely in our pockets, away from danger. So last year, my sister was working at a local Starbucks along this string of shops. There was a grocery store and about 10 other small stores in the shopping center. One day my sister came home and began to tell us about this really creepy guy who kept coming in at the same time every night. She's 16 and really small, about 5'1". She's also really skinny and doesn't know how to defend herself either. After the first few encounters, he began to call her Goldilocks or Cutie Pie. She claimed that this guy was in his late 20s or early 30s, so this was completely inappropriate and just plain gross. This happened for a few months, and they would tell my sister to go to the back area when he would come in. The guy then would ask them where she was when he didn't see her serving there. Me and my parents decided to go visit her Starbucks around the time he came in a few times, and sure enough, every night around the same time, the guy wore a similar outfit every day. A white t-shirt with blue jeans. We visited her for a few days, and on one of those days, we decided to see how far away he lived and if he was a local, where to keep an eye out. This may have not been a completely appropriate thing to do, but my dad is really protective, so I was up for it. We got in the car after the guy's usual visit. He had also purchased kitty litter at the grocery store, so he was a cat guy, and followed out his car. This is where it gets really weird. We were in the car for about 45 minutes when we crossed the state line into the neighboring state. He lived in a not-so-nice area, not to mention it was Maryland, and he drove for another 10 minutes until he reached his rundown apartment complex. Full-on ghetto. This guy was traveling close to an hour to see my sister every day. After this, we told her to talk to her coworkers about it, and they told the guy that he wasn't allowed to make contact with my sister anymore because she was a minor. He never came back to that Starbucks again. My sister actually ended up moving to a closer one too in the end, so the creepy guy in blue jeans and white shirt at the Starbucks wouldn't be able to see her. I work in downtown Seattle, and every day I take this train, the light rail, to and from work at around 3 p.m. I usually walk from my house to Starbucks, hang out there for a while, and walk for about 10 minutes to the train. By last week, I had been following the same routine for over 2 months and had never noticed anything strange. I don't usually pay attention to my surroundings as I'm either listening to music, doing something on my phone, reading, or doing all of that at once. Anyway, last week I was walking from Starbucks to the train like I normally do, and I simply didn't notice anything. My train hadn't arrived yet, so I sat down on a bench and kept reading something on my phone. I noticed that someone had taken the seat next to me, but I wasn't fazed. Living in Seattle, I get used to people invading my personal space. I glance up and see a man, probably late 20s, staring at me with a massive smile on his face. I gave a quick smile back and continued doing whatever it was I was doing. I then hear him say, "Hello," with a slight accent, something from the Middle East, I think. And so to be polite, I say hello back, but I clearly am not interested in talking. He continues staring and smiling at me and then says, "Have you seen me in Starbucks before?" I look up and shake my head and say no. He sounds sad and then he stops talking for a moment, looking dejected. Now he decides to use his extremely creepy pickup line. "I watch you every day from Starbucks, and today I follow you all the way to the train." Saying this with a massive smile on his face. At this point, I didn't know exactly what to do, so I just looked at him and then put my headphones back in, hoping that he would screw off. He taps me on the shoulder and says, "I come all this way. Give me your number." His smile started to fade at this point, and I'm praying that the train will arrive soon that I can escape. I finally said no, and he gave me a truly angry face and said, "Why no?" I gave him the traditional, "I have a boyfriend," excuse, except I actually did, so when he said, "You serious? Or are you just, I quickly showed him my phone background of my boyfriend, and I thought he would give up at that point, but no. Instead, he starts stroking my hair and saying, "You lovely smell," with that massive smile like he just completely didn't hear what I had just said. Luckily, the train showed up right at that moment, and I was relieved that he didn't follow me on. If he had been there when I came back at 11 p.m., I don't know what I would have done, but it wouldn't have ended well. Needless to say, I transferred to a new Starbucks shortly after that. This particular incident took place over the spring of 2011 when I was about 15 or 16. My friends and I frequented the local Starbucks, and we had a great time there. Most of the employees were really great. One of them, David, was kind of odd. I didn't think much of him, and I always gave him the benefit of the doubt, even when my other friends called him creepy. My friends and I went there quite often, and like usual people, we had to go to the bathroom every once in a while. One day, we were there for a long time, probably almost 4 hours, and we noticed David going to the bathroom quite often. We didn't think about it until about a month later when we saw an article online. Apparently, David had put a camera in the bathroom and had been taking footage of young women and putting it on his computer. He would go to the bathroom about every hour and collect and download the footage. The police aren't sure if he uploaded them onto the internet or shared them at all. Unluckily for him, I'm severely lactose intolerant, and many of those milk-filled lattes probably didn't make the most attractive photos. He was arrested, and I haven't heard about him since. Looking back on this memory, I feel badly. Women should stick together, I was always raised to believe, and girls should always help other girls. But one day I was in Barnes & Noble's Starbucks coffee shop trying to finish some homework. I was facing my sister, whose back was against the wall, and I had my back to the rest of the store. The only other people in the cafe was this older man in his 50s or 60s and this teenage girl with blue hair. They were sitting at different tables, but the man had his feet in the aisle and was less than an arm's length from this child. Yes, teens are not kids, but she barely looked 15. In his hand was his camera, and he was attempting to show the screen to her, all the while saying, "I love how your face catches the light in this one. You have such a lovely bone structure." I was mildly sick, so I couldn't catch the drift of what was happening. I kept catching the girl's eyes, but I sadly didn't read the message she was sending. Suddenly, a Taekwondo van pulled up outside, and she bolted from the table to the door and into the van. It was then that it dawned on me that this man was a complete stranger and had taken several photos of her without her knowledge or consent. I wish I could say I had the ovaries to go up to him and demand he delete those photos of her, as they clearly made her uncomfortable. But I went back to my hydraulics, and he left soon afterwards. I spent my first couple of years after high school just kind of wandering around and trying to figure out what to do next. I worked at a lot of lame jobs, and I regularly signed up late for classes at a couple different community college campuses. This meant I spent a lot of time driving anywhere between a half hour to an hour to get where I needed to go, and a lot of my commute took me to parts of the city and the suburbs that I had never seen before. Back then, everything felt way too big and complicated, and I was totally lost, but I loved coffee. I would always make time in my schedule to stop at Starbucks, get coffee, and read a little bit. I think it was because no matter where I was, one of these shops always felt familiar. This was sort of my way of coping with growing up. Once, when I was waiting for a friend to get off of work, I stopped at a Starbucks I knew. When I first walked in, I noticed a girl who seemed really familiar. This would happen pretty often, and at the time, I figured I recognized her from campus, work, or even high school. She sort of smiled when she saw me, but other than that, we didn't interact. This location had a lot of space. There was a large lobby with 5 or 6 tables, a bar-style counter facing the windows, and an outside eating area, and even a few of those stuffed chairs. The girl I had first noticed sat at the table closest to the door, and I chose a smaller table by one of the windows, away from the other customers, but clearly visible by most. I probably bought a mocha. When I sat down, I must have spread all of my stuff out because I remember the table being kind of cluttered. I like to take notes when I read, even just for fun, so I'll have a notebook, a pen, my book, and also my wallet. I don't like to sit on it, and my phone on the table. I'm pretty single-minded, so when I read, I can get really into the zone. I'll lay my book on the table so that I can hunch over my notebook and take notes without losing my place on the page. Sometimes I'll lose track of my surroundings. This time, when I eventually looked up, I realized that someone was watching me. Another guy had taken the table across from mine. He looked about my age with yellowish hair. I remember he was wearing jeans, which seemed weird because it was still basically summer and it was hot out. He didn't have any drink, and it didn't seem like he was going to order one. Once he saw that I had his attention, he started talking to me. He asked me small stuff like what my name was, where I was from, what I was reading. I was immediately creeped out, but I had always been inherently introverted, and at that time I was trying to span out and meet new people, so I talked to him. Eventually he moved over to my table and talked about how he was new to the area. He asked where I was going after this, and when I told him, he said he was going in the same direction. He said that since he was new, he didn't know any of the street names, but that he could find his way by landmarks and stuff. As hard as I was trying to be social, for some reason I didn't feel comfortable giving him a ride. I told him I was planning on staying at the coffee shop for a couple of more hours because I was waiting for a friend. This seemed to bother him because he abruptly changed the subject, but he eventually brought it back up. We went on like this for maybe a half an hour. He would ask for a ride again or ask which car was mine, and I would make up some excuse, and then he would talk about something else for a couple of minutes. Eventually, we ran out of other stuff to talk about, so he just started looking at my stuff more. He looked at my notes, asked to borrow my pen, and at one point he even picked up my wallet and started looking through it. Back then, I was really non-confrontational, so rather than demand my stuff back, I just started to slowly pack up whatever he wasn't messing with. Eventually, he decided he needed to go to the restroom, so I started putting everything away. At this point, that girl I had recognized from earlier came over and asked if I was okay. I said I was, but I probably looked really uncomfortable. She told me that I shouldn't give him a ride, and that I should just ask him to leave me alone. She actually even stayed with me until he came back out and told him that he should leave me alone. He kind of acted shocked and offended, but then he left the store. At that point, I probably should have just left myself, but I stayed. I talked to the girl a little bit and went back to reading. After a while, a lady in her mid-30s came in. She wore a low-cut blue dress and a lot of makeup. Her hair was styled. She sat down across from me and asked if my name was Dean. I told her yes, and she asked if I could give that guy a ride. She actually offered to pay me $20 to give him a ride. I politely refused and got up to leave, but when I got to the door, I looked outside and saw that the guy was waiting by my car. I hadn't actually identified it to him, and this was a large store parking lot. I looked back at the lady, and she was just watching me. Rather than go confront him, I sat across from the girl I knew in the spot where I could watch this car. I didn't want to admit how nervous I was, so I didn't call the cops or attempt to bring any attention to my situation. Instead, I proceeded to read while I watched the guy. Eventually, a security guard came up and asked him to move along. After that, I basically ran out to my car and drove straight home, making sure no one was following me. I don't know what any of that was about, but I'm really thankful for that one familiar face. One evening, as I'm on my computer just browsing Facebook, I happen to get a message notification. Thinking it's one of my friends or family members, as I have my profile blocked from people I don't know so they can't message me, I click on the notification to open up the message. It's from an elderly man who doesn't live in the same town as me. This will become important later. He tells me I'm very beautiful. I just reply with a thanks and leave it at that. I should have never even replied because he immediately replies with, "Are you single?" When clearly in my profile picture there is my boyfriend of 3 years and I'm embracing, kind of obvious you'd think anyway, I reply with no. He replies with, "Shame." I end up blocking him and going to bed. The next morning I'm opening and I'm alone. It's dark out as it's only 5 a.m. We don't open for another hour. When I hear, "Hey, you're looking beautiful as ever this morning." I turn around expecting one of the coworkers from my store that my kiosk is placed in to be just messing with me, but to my horror, the elderly man was there. He lives in a town that is a whole 1.5 hours away from me. The fact that he drove all that way just to see me terrified me. I went and told my manager about it, and he told me to go to the back room and he would come get me when the guy was gone. It took a while, but my manager finally came and got me. The guy, after I disappeared, ended up walking the whole store multiple times trying to find me. and even asking associates if they had seen me walking around and that he needed to talk to me. My manager quickly told the gentleman that he was worrying his employees and that it would be best if he left before he had to call the cops. Needless to say, he hasn't spoken to me, but I do occasionally see him lurking about the store. Once last summer, my friends and I went to a Starbucks right by our houses. We just wanted to relax, drink our coffee, and have a good time. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. After we ordered our drinks and we sat on the couches and just hung out, all of a sudden, some older guy, he was probably in his 40s or 50s, walked in, paused, looked around, and then stared at us for a couple of seconds. I was unaware he did this until my friend Brandy pointed it out later on. He came up to us and shouted, "High five!" I refused to give him a high five, but Megan and Brandy awkwardly high-fived him. The guy stood in front of us and started asking us a lot of questions. The conversation went something like this. "So, how are you doing?" Good?" There was silence. Brandy and Megan and I all start awkwardly laughing. "So, what school do you go to?" Megan, creeped out, I don't think we want to tell you that." The old guy replies, giving Megan a creepy smile and looking directly at me. "Is she a bad girl?" I start laughing uncontrollably. I know, I shouldn't have laughed, but I'm kind of an awkward person sometimes, and I honestly didn't know what to do at that moment. He then stares at us for a little bit and then walks towards the counter. Brandy, Megan, and I start whispering about what just happened, and we're definitely creeped out by this guy. I asked them why they gave him a high five, and they said that they thought he knew one of us. We certainly did not know him. All of a sudden, Megan said that he was staring at us, and when I looked up, he was standing by the counter, waiting for his drink and staring straight at us with this disgusting smirk. At that moment, all three of us got up and left. We went to a Smith's that was right next door and waited for a little bit until we felt safe to go outside. After loitering around Smith's for about 10 to 15 minutes, we walked outside and didn't see him. We went back to Starbucks and hung out for a little bit until Megan got picked up by her mom and left. Now, since we live close to Starbucks, Brandy and I started walking home. It was during the afternoon, so there were plenty of people out, but we still felt incredibly uncomfortable. We kept looking over our shoulders just to make sure that this old guy wasn't following us. Thankfully, we safely got to my house and hung out there until my dad got home. My dad used to be a cop, and we told him all about the old creep and how he made us uncomfortable. My dad kind of laughed it off. The guy hadn't really done anything illegal except make us super uncomfortable. After that, we never saw him again, thank God. However, later on Brandy told me how when he walked into Starbucks, he scanned the cafe and how he picked the three of us out from the rest of the coffee lovers there. Also, when he originally asked, "Is she a bad girl?" I thought he was talking about my friend Megan, but it turns out that he was talking about me. This just made me even more creeped out than before. However, I still go to that Starbucks, and again, I have not seen him. I'm glad I haven't run into him, but I am worried that maybe he is doing the same thing, or maybe even worse to other teenage girls. I can only hope not. Just a little background. On the day this happened, I was with my girlfriend. I am also female, and we are both just under 5 foot tall and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Point is, we're tiny. But anyways, on to the story. On this particular day, it had been raining outside and seemed like the perfect weather to stay curled up inside watching movies. One problem, no snacks. So my girlfriend and I decided to walk to the mini-mart just down the street. As we were walking, we noticed there was a man trailing some distance behind us, and he is muttering to himself, talking under his breath. At first, we paid him no mind. There are a fairly large number of homeless people in our area, and sadly, many have mental illnesses. We continued walking and noticed he was still behind us. Weird. We get inside the store and start picking out snacks, and I notice he is standing right outside the store, peering in, staring directly at us. At this point, I am a little worried, but when we check out, he is no longer there, so I brush it off. Further down the street from the store, there's a Starbucks, so we decide to stop and get some coffee before walking back to the house. The entire walk, I felt like we were being watched and just couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. We walk into Starbucks and order our drinks and sit down to wait. I look out the window, and there's the same guy again. He's across the street, but he is staring straight at us. At this point, I'm freaking out and trying to tell my girl this creep has followed us, but she insists it's nothing. The next time I look up, the guy is inside the Starbucks and staring at us with a look I can only describe as predatory and hungry. I'm terrified at this point. We grab our drinks and are getting ready to head out when he yells out, "Hey, there you are." Heads turn to see what the commotion is about, and he calmly says, "That's my niece and daughter. I told them not to go anywhere without telling me." My girlfriend decides to react at this point and grabs my hand, and we get out of there. We speed walk down the street, hoping to put some distance between us before he can react. I turn back around, and he's still following us. He's not chasing after us. He's sauntering in a way and has a menacing look on his face. This guy was pretty built and close to 6 foot. There was no way we could take him if it came down to it. We do the only thing that we can think of and start running. This is when he starts chasing us and screaming out, "Don't go! Don't you want to play?" The road back to my girlfriend's house is pretty desolate with no houses for a few more blocks, and we're running away from the only area where there would be people. At this point, he is gaining on us, and I think that at any minute he will catch up to us, and that will be the end. The guy is almost 10 feet behind us when, almost miraculously, we see a car coming down the street. We start running towards it, waving our hands and yelling, trying to get this car to stop. It does, and we frantically start telling the driver that this guy is following us. The driver steps out, and the would-be creep stops dead in his tracks. He stands protectively in front of us and says something along the lines of, "Just walk away, buddy. You don't want any trouble." The creep stares us down, and then gives us the creepiest smile I have ever seen, shrugs his shoulders, and walks back up the street. The driver insists on seeing us home and trails behind us the rest of the walk until he sees we are safely inside. Thinking back, we should have called the cops, but we were too scared to think straight. Thank God for good Samaritans. I shudder to think as to what could have happened if that car had not stopped, or that guy had actually caught up to us. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community. And be sure to check out my Choose Your Own Path horror game on the iOS and Android App Store, and grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 or more a month on Patreon. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.